My name is Adrian Vale Mercer, and today I'm going to share the story of how my own parents asked me to vanish from their lives the very week my sister was set to marry. They told me that my absence would be the greatest gift I could offer. That night, I packed my bag, walked out of the Mercer estate, and promised myself I would never beg for a seat at their table again. What followed wasn't just rejection, it was erasure. Accounts frozen. My apartment was listed without my consent. My name was treated like it never belonged. This is not just a story about a broken family. It's about learning to choose yourself when the people who raised you would rather bury you alive than see you shine. Before I dive in, take a moment to subscribe and drop a comment about where you're watching from. Every message reminds me that I'm not alone, and that this story, however painful, might help someone else find their own voice. The first time I stepped into the Mercer estate after Serena's engagement, the scent of burning pine hit me. For most people it might bring warmth, but for me it meant judgment. In the mahogany-paneled lounge, flames snapped like applause for a show I was never invited to join. My eyes moved across the display hutch filled with Serena Whitmore's trophies, debates, scholarships, innovation forums, framed pictures of her shaking hands with powerful names. My one certificate from age 15 sat tucked in the corner, treated more like clutter than memory. Helena Mercer's voice cut through the room before I could speak. The caterer needs final answers tomorrow. Flowers must be delivered by noon. You'll handle it. No excuses. I nodded, writing the order into the ledger book I carried everywhere. My father, Richard Mercer, didn't even glance up from his chair. "Just don't complicate things," he muttered, his tone hollow, as if my presence alone risked disaster. Moments later, Serena's face filled the laptop screen from Portland, her hair polished, her smile certain. Helena's voice softened instantly. "Darling, the patron council loved your last pitch. You've outdone yourself again." Every compliment thrown at Serena pierced me like glass. When she asked about the wedding, Helena gestured toward me without warmth. "Your brother is arranging everything." Serena smiled thinly. I whispered, "I'll make sure it's perfect," though the static swallowed my words. The door opened and swept Marissa Lang, clipboard in hand, all cheering. "This will be the event of the season," she declared, passing me a thick folder. "Keep everything in order." The weight pressed down like chains. Later that evening, in the spare loft, I opened an email accidentally forwarded to me. It was the save the date for guests. Listed speakers, Serena, Helena, Richard. My name is absent. My role had been officially reduced to silent logistics. I stared at the old upright piano in the corner, keys frayed under a dusty cloth. When I pressed one, the sound was dull, like a voice strangled before it left the throat. To understand how I became the family's invisible servant, you'd need to return to Ashwood Ridge summers, when I was a boy by the riverbank. At 9, I played a melody I had written for Helena's birthday. My fingers shook with pride, but her reaction was quick and cold. "That's nice, Adrian. But Serena just won a scholarship. That's the real gift." My smile froze, and I tucked my music away. By 11, I begged to stay in the school band. Helena told me no. It wasn't practical. Richard suggested I study business like Serena. I folded my sheet music, locked it in a drawer, and started shrinking before anyone else could cut me down. At 15, I won a local award for composition. My teacher, Jonah Price, hugged me and whispered, "Never let anyone silence you." For a single day, I believed him. But when I came home, the award was shoved behind Serena's robotics trophy in the display hutch. My victory was buried before the week was out. When I first loved Elise Rowan Hart, I thought I'd finally been seen. She admired my music, my quiet nature. But over time, the endless comparisons wore her down. "You never push back," she told me before leaving. What she called weakness was just survival in my family's house. Silence was safer than fighting and losing. Years blurred into chores and errands. I was the driver when Helena's migraines struck, the handyman when pipes broke, the one who fetched Richard's prescriptions. No thanks ever came. My life had been reduced to keeping the machine running, while being reminded I was never part of the celebration it powered. It wasn't a question. It was always assumed I would take on the load. One evening, searching through Richard Mercer's study cabinet for a misplaced cash ledger, I stumbled upon a binder of records stamped with my initials, AVM. Every page documented bills for the estate, doctor's visits, roof repairs, endless expenses, all marked as paid by Adrian. My identity had become nothing more than a line in a ledger. The insult deepened while sorting through wedding files. A shopping list for the reception had been taped over a photocopy of me at 15, receiving my music award. Helena's red pen had slashed across my smiling face. Order 120 napkins. Don't forget candles. My achievement turned into scratch paper. I slipped the ruined page into my pocket, a secret rebellion I wasn't sure would ever matter. I built Serena's wedding as if I were composing a symphony, layer by layer, balancing rhythm and tone. The venue was a restored mill house at the edge of Ashwu, a ridge, rafters laced with lanterns, the stalls polished into rustic charm. For flowers, I hunted down dusk-colored irises because Serena once said they reminded her of first chances. I arranged a banquet menu with grilled lamb, mashed potatoes, and not a hint of onions. Helena's rules carried like gospel. Every call logged in my ledger book felt heavier than any instrument I'd ever touched. That afternoon, Marissa Lang emailed a revised timeline with a cheerful subject line masking a sharp cut. Brother of the bride remarks, replaced with mother's tribute. My spot erased, but an extra 15 minutes reserved for investor acknowledgments. I told myself I didn't need a microphone to matter, then practiced smiling in the mirror of a thrifted tailor shop, my new ash-gray suit designed not to offend. I looked like a man hired to keep chairs from collapsing, not a brother. At the town square office, I filed contracts, cross-checked deliveries, and slipped sound agreements into plastic sleeves. The high-end sound rig was the one piece I fought to protect. Clear audio mattered. Vows should be heard, even if I never was. During vendor meetings, the florist and caterer shook hands with Helena and Marissa before glancing at me for confirmation. Mrs. Mercer's assistant? One asked. Marissa didn't correct them. She smiled and moved on. My handwriting in the notes looked like it belonged to a stranger filling in for the day. That evening, a wooden case with a sapphire pendant sat waiting in my apartment. I had spent $2,700 I didn't have, believing maybe beauty could bridge the chasm words never could. I pictured Serena's face softening when she opened it, the music in my head swelling like applause. Then I caught myself laughing. I was scoring a fantasy. Near midnight, an email forwarded by mistake appeared in my inbox. Marissa had written to a partner, describing the wedding as a launch pad for her firm's profile and for Daniel Hayes's patron council, where optics and access mattered more than family. My chest burned, then froze. All my work carried other people's names, never mine. By the next day, the audio company called to confirm setup, until a note from the finance bureau arrived. The premium system had been canceled, replaced by a cheaper package. Clara's shared notes explained it plainly. Reallocate to VIP gifts. Helena called it practical. I nodded anyway, then scribbled in my ledger. Borrow extra lapel mics from the local playhouse. That night, the bridal party group chat lit up. Someone asked if the younger brother who wrote music would be performing. The pause was short. Helena replied it didn't fit the image we're curating, adding a laugh in parentheses. Silence followed. No objections. I set my phone down and stared at the dust-slung old upright piano with frayed keys in the corner. The cover pulled halfway off, like a jacket abandoned mid-motion. On my bed lay contracts, menus, seating charts, and a speech draft Helena had written. My role reduced to handing over flowers, then stepping aside. I placed the photocopied page beside the wooden case with the sapphire pendant, staring at them like two stories that would never cross. The stone caught the light while the page waited for my name. I wondered which would break first, the version of me my family kept telling, or the beams holding this entire house upright. 2 days before the wedding, the Mercer estate smelled of smoke and lemon polish. I carried in 3 boxes of handmade decorations, Lanterns strung on wire, wildflowers bound with twine, setting them by the hearth. A fourth box still sat in my apartment, forgotten in exhaustion. Helena's E. Yes flicked to the gap, then to me. "You always leave something undone," she said, voice sharp as a blade. Richard rose from his chair, his tone frosted. "You're making us look bad again." The room shrank. Serena and Daniel Hayes watched from the stairs, silent and unmoving. Their silence was its own verdict. Marissa Lang scribbled on her clipboard, her look saying she understood, but wouldn't interfere. I laid contracts and receipts across the coffee table, explaining line by line. Helena skimmed, then brushed them aside. Serena would have handled this better. My chest hollowed. Upstairs in the spare loft, I opened my laptop, searching for air more than answers. An email thread blinked onto the screen, an invite forwarded by mistake. It revealed a second vendor already contracted as backup, arranged by Daniel. Contingency if Adrian fails. Clean, efficient, nameless erasure. Later, at the restored mill house, a volunteer asked if the bride's brother would be performing during cocktail hour. I checked the thread again. Helena's reply sat there, decisive. Not appropriate for the image. That word clung to me. Appropriate, as if my music was a liability. When I returned home, the sapphire pendant case was gone from the table. That evening, I overheard Helena mention on the phone that Richard had chosen the family's gift, a pendant presented during the toast. My receipt, still in my wallet, pulsed under my fingertips. I began scanning everything, contracts, invoices, cancellation notices, saving them in a folder labeled only with shorthand I could understand. Each file felt like another plank in a raft I was quietly building. Outside, Dakota Plains dusk turned the windows into black mirrors. Downstairs, the fire sputtered like a warning, shadows stretching too clean and still. I carried the remaining boxes to my truck, vowing to fetch the last before midnight. When I re-entered, Richard had stacked my folders by the door, as if clearing space for something more valuable. I slid them under my arm. The ceiling creaked above, wood groaning like the house itself wanted to split. In the hallway, Marissa touched my elbow. "Don't take it personally," she whispered. I didn't, I lied. Her hand slipped away, a gesture too small to stay. Upstairs, Serena sat in her childhood room. "The irises look beautiful," she said, then asked me to shuffle 2 donors' seats. I agreed. She never asked how I was. The screen glow lit her face while I waited for her to notice the weight in my voice. She didn't. Back in the loft, I sat on the bed with my ledger book stretched across my knees. I checked deliveries, texted a florist thanks, and confirmed the tent walls with the rental company. Then, I unfolded the necklace receipt, folded it again, and tucked it behind Helena's sample speech. Laughter drifted from downstairs. The fire popped. The house moaned again, like warning cracks spreading in its frame. A thought came suddenly and completely. If I spoke tomorrow, if I tugged the right thread, the whole performance might unravel. I placed the ledger in my bag, gathered my folders, and stepped toward the stairs. The light from the Mercer Estates lounge pulsed down the hallway, bright then dim, like a heartbeat that couldn't decide if it should keep going. The fire spat in the grate, casting a false warmth over the mahogany-paneled lounge. I placed my ledger book on the coffee table, hands loose at my sides. Fists were forbidden in Helena Mercer's house. Her words landed without preface. "You never get it right, Adrian." Each syllable was clean, precise, like she was correcting figures in the Finance Bureau's report. I thought of listing the irises, the menu, the back, upside secured, but instead my fingers stayed curled around the keys in my pocket. Richard rose slowly, smoothing his sweater as if straightening a portrait. His tone was frosted, casual. "You don't belong here." On the stairs, Serena and Daniel Hayes watched, her engagement ring flashing in the firelight, his jaw set in polite neutrality. Their silence was a verdict. Marissa Lang opened her mouth to speak, but stopped when Helena's eyes cut her down. Helena folded her arms, the fire snapping behind her. "We can't risk you derailing tomorrow." Then came the line that stripped the paint off The Last of Us. The only way you can help this wedding is by staying gone. For good. The words echoed in the wood and found no answer. I didn't plead. I didn't explain. I picked up the receipts and walked out. The door shut behind me with the weight of 19 years closing at once. Outside, the air cut sharp, but it was finally mine. In my apartment, I left the lights off and leaned against the sink, the silence heavy as snow after a storm. My phone buzzed. Nolan Gray had sent a reminder about the livestream test. I swiped it away, then opened it again. The rehearsal filled my screen, lanterns I'd strung glowing softly, Serena smiling, my parents raising glasses beside Marissa and local officials. My absence fit so perfectly, no one even mentioned it. I watched until my throat burned, then muted the sound. The wooden pendant case sat on the counter. Under the glow of my laptop, the sapphire gleamed like water trapped beneath glass. I slid the receipt behind the hinge. The apartment bore witness to the truth. I had built a life on apologies drafted before anyone asked for them, on yeses that shrank me smaller each year. Something in me stopped begging for permission to exist. I clenched the keys in my fist until their edges pressed crescents into my palm. The screen glowed blue, cold and alive. Midnight felt like the edge of a morning I could finally choose. I opened an old draft resignation, stared at the subject line, and knew it was time. Family had been my excuse to stay invisible. Now, if disappearing was their demand, I would give it to them in full. By dawn, the apartment smelled of cardboard and coffee. I held the ledger one last time, then shut it in a drawer. I wasn't going to keep cataloging other people's triumphs. If absence was their definition of love, I would deliver it with no return address. The morning was glassy and cold. I typed my resignation after 7 years, short and clean, no apologies attached. I added a handover note, hit send, and watched the email leave like a bird that had always known its own sky. Then I called a realtor, told her to list the apartment immediately, and accepted a price of $28,000 under market just to move fast. By noon, I was sitting in a small conference room with Felicity Brandt and Calvin Rhodes, the only attorneys who had ever spoken my name without turning it into a command. At the town square office, we combed through my accounts. Calvin Rhodes flagged anything still tied to household emergency funds, while Felicity Brandt shifted my savings into a trust I alone controlled. My hand trembled once as I signed, then steadied. Calvin reread the clauses. Felicity reminded me, boundaries aren't cruelty. We set alerts for any unapproved withdrawals. When it was done, she said softly, "You've carried more than anyone should." I had no reply. I wasn't used to kindness that didn't come with conditions. Back at the apartment, I packed only what felt true. The battered guitar, my laptop, a box of scores, the wooden case with the sapphire pendant, the binder of records, and a cedar-scented sweater. I left the couch, the prints, the dishes, all the props I'd staged for someone else's comfort. Stripped bare, the rooms looked bigger, as if my absence created more space than my presence ever had. I loaded the truck, checked the oil, and turned up a playlist loud enough to drown Helena's voice in my head. The road bent through pastures before climbing into the mountains. Snow lingered on the ridges. The sky above was a hard, metallic blue. At the first gas station, the bathroom mirror showed me a stranger, tired, younger somehow, but steady. I washed my hands, watching water strike my knuckles like a blessing. On the highway, Helena's text arrived. "No real son walks away like this. Return." I let the screen fade dark. Minutes later, Richard's message followed. "Your mother is in the hospital. Critical." My chest clenched until I called Dr. Miriam Holt. Her calm voice cut through. "She had a panic episode. She's stable at home now." Relief washed over me. Not warm, but honest. Near the state line, Serena's email chimed. Apologies about tone, excuses about pressure, a request to help everyone by returning for a few days. Twice she used my name, but it read like a press release. I closed it without reply. Compassion wasn't gone. I had simply run out of it for free. Somewhere near a second motel, a headline flashed across my phone. Helena's quote, "My son stole from us and abandoned his sick mother." The photo showed Richard and Helena at Serena's rehearsal dinner, composed as saints. I pulled into a turnout and opened the binder of records. Receipts shuffled inside. Every medical bill I'd paid, every repair I'd covered. Proof doesn't heal, but it stands like scaffolding when the heart has been gutted. The third morning, a notification from Calvin. An attempted withdrawal of $9,500 marked as urgent house repairs. Denied for lack of documents, exactly as designed. I louse high. At once not bitter, just stunned. Systems holding firm for me was a new sensation. By late afternoon, the air shifted. Salt threaded the wind. The truck hummed like relief as the road descended into Seabridge Harbor. Boats pressed shoulder to shoulder along the docks. Gulls carved loops overhead. Weathered storefronts leaned in blues and creams. The rental cottage waited, wooden and bowed, its porch sagging gently in the middle. The floor groaned beneath my boots, but not once did it ask me to shrink. I leaned the guitar against the wall, cracked open the windows, and let the ocean in. The ledger book sat on the table untouched. For the first time, it didn't own me. Instead, I pulled out a cheap pen and a pad. Notes spilled, imperfect, jagged, refusing to be pretty. They sounded like leaving and arriving all at once. My phone buzzed with fresh headlines and unanswered messages. I left them untouched. A buoy clanged somewhere in the fog. When the cold reached my knuckles, I locked the door and leaned back against it. Without fear, this house would push me out. In the mirror, I saw someone done bargaining with fire that never gave warmth. I turned out the light and listened to the tide rewrite the shoreline again and again, like a lesson worth keeping. Sleep came with the image of lanterns swinging in the restored mill house and the table where my name was never printed. And then, at last, I let both go. The ocean kept rhythm outside my window, steady as a metronome. In this quiet wooden house in Seabridge Harbor, no one shushed me, no one told me my role. I asked myself out loud, what music would I write now when the only approval I needed was my own? The first weeks passed in anonymity. The floors creaked like they were glad to hold someone who only asked for shelter. Salt glazed the windows. Gulls sliced the sky. For a while, I believed I had outrun Ashwood Ridge. Then, one morning at the cafe, the headlines dragged me back. A Montana outlet quoted Hell. "Ina, my son stole money. He abandoned his sick mother." The words stung, designed to. I laid the binder of records across the cafe table. Receipts, contracts, every line of proof. This time, silence wasn't guilt. Later, through a video call, Felicity Brandt and Calvin Rhodes reminded me the trust was airtight. Their calm steadied me like sandbags against a storm tide. For once, I wasn't standing alone. At the counter, Sienna Cruz poured coffee, her bracelets clinking. When I told her about the article, she only asked, "If you went back, what would change?" The question pierced sharper than any insult. I had no answer, only the ache of being seen. That night, I walked to the docks. The water slammed against pilings, wind pushing salt into my eyes. For years, I had heard applause in my absence, laughter from the restored mill house, glasses clinking while I sat in the shadows. But here, the waves drowned out the memory. I didn't need their clapping. The sea was louder, and it was mine. When Serena's message arrived, asking if I'd allow a small withdrawal for Mom, I saw through it. She wasn't protecting Helena. She was shielding her own polished image. I closed the message. Silence this time was strength. Soon after, a mediator contacted me. Helena was considering legal action, claiming the trust was unauthorized. I laughed, one dry sound. Years of unpaid labor, and now they wanted to flip the script. Absurdity steadied me more than fear. That night I lifted the cover off a chipped piano in the rental. The keys were uneven, but when I pressed them, a melody spilled out, raw, salt-heavy, pulled from the sea itself. Tears blurred my vision, not from grief, but recognition. At last, the music filled the room without being hushed. I titled the piece Chord, not an echo, not background noise, something that belonged entirely to me. The truth broke like dawn. Felicity and Calvin released the records. Articles reversed the narrative. I wasn't a thief, not a deserter, only someone who refused to be the family's silent accountant. Richard and Helena offered no comment. Serena avoided questions with her practiced boardroom smile. Their silence confessed what they would never say. At the Harbor Arts Collective, neighbors and strangers gathered. I sat at the piano, hands trembling, then sure. Chord rose through the hall like surf striking the dock. When the last note fell, the applause that followed was warm, human, unmeasured, real. For once, sound came back to me not as an echo, but as belonging. Felicity projected the records on a screen. Faces in the crowd nodded. Some touched my shoulder. Others simply listened. Vindication wasn't victory. It was clear. And it was enough. That night, Nolan Gray messaged me. He still had the recording, Helena's voice demanding I disappear forever. He asked if I wanted it public. I set the phone down. I didn't need revenge. I already had freedom. A final text from Helena came through. If you leave, don't ever come back. I read it once, then deleted it. For the first time, her words felt like a gift, not a curse. The following evening, a filmmaker approached after hearing my music. She wanted me to compose for her next project. I said yes, not to prove anything, but because it felt alive. Later, I stood on the pier as the ocean roared beneath a blood-red sky. I opened my journal and wrote, "Family is not always the people tied by blood. Sometimes family is where your voice is heard without permission." I closed the book, breathed in the salt air, and listened to the waves crash again and again, louder than any applause I once craved. In that rhythm, I whispered to myself, I choose me.